It all started not with a bang, but with silence. Out there, far beyond the stars we see on a clear night, something terrible had happened. A whole civilization, people not so different from us in how they loved, feared, and hoped, had been cast out. Not because they were dangerous, but because they refused to do something cruel. They were part of a big alliance of spacefaring races working together across galaxies. But when that alliance decided to wipe out a younger, weaker species, this group said no. They stood their ground, and for that they were punished. Their homeworld was destroyed. Their ships were hunted down. Their history was erased from every record in the galaxy. They became ghosts, unwanted, unspoken of, and alone. Only one ship survived. It wasn't fancy or powerful. It was old, patched together, running on fumes. On board were just a few hundred souls, most of them children or elders. They had nowhere to go. The stars they once knew now turned their backs on them. But then someone remembered Earth. Not because it was advanced, far from it. Human broadcasts were still full of static, music, and confused chatter about sports and weather. But in all that noise, something stood out: kindness. Old radio plays about helping strangers, emergency broadcasts offering aid after disasters, even simple songs about love and home. To a people drowning in betrayal, those signals felt like a lifeline. So they aimed their broken ship toward the third planet from a small yellow star, and hoped. The journey took decades. Generations passed inside that vessel. Babies were born in zero gravity, never knowing soil beneath their feet. Elders whispered stories of green skies and twin moons, trying to keep their culture alive. Food ran low. Hope ran lower. But they held on, because turning back meant certain death and stopping meant floating forever in the dark. Then, in the year 2087, their ship finally reached the edge of our solar system. It was battered, its engines failing, its hull scarred by cosmic dust and time. Navigation systems flickered. They knew they wouldn't survive a proper landing. But they had no choice. They aimed for a quiet place, somewhere remote, dry, and rarely visited. The Taklamakan Desert in western China fit the bill. Vast, empty, and surrounded by mountains, it was one of the last places on Earth where a crash might go unnoticed. The descent was brutal. Metal groaned. Alarms blared in a language no human had ever heard. Then impact. The ship tore through the dunes, carving a deep scar in the sand before coming to rest in a cloud of dust and silence. Inside, chaos. Smoke filled the corridors. Lights flickered. Of the 189 who had left their dying world, only 127 were still breathing. Many were hurt, broken bones, burns, shock. The air outside was breathable but thin and cold. They staggered out into the blinding sun, squinting at a sky that held only one moon, one sun, and no sign of rescue. For days, they waited. They rationed the last of their water, shared body heat at night, and kept watch for any sign of life, friendly or not. They knew humans could be unpredictable. Stories from intercepted broadcasts showed both great compassion and terrible violence. Would they be welcomed, hunted, studied like insects? No one came. The desert stretched in every direction, endless and golden. Wind howled through the dunes. The survivors huddled near the wreckage, their strange silver-gray skin turning red from the sun. Their large, dark eyes, adapted to dimmer starlight, ached in the daylight. They tried to repair their comms, but Earth's atmosphere scrambled their signals. They were truly alone. Then, on the fifth morning, movement. A figure appeared on the horizon, small, wrapped in thick wool, leading a few scrawny goats. He wasn't a soldier, not a scientist, just a man, walking the same path his family had walked for centuries. He'd seen the smoke days earlier but thought it was a sandstorm. Now up close he froze. Before him stood beings unlike anything in his wildest dreams, tall, slender, with eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. They didn't raise weapons. They didn't speak. They just watched him, exhausted and afraid. Most people would have run, screamed, called the authorities. But this man, he'd lost his wife and 2 young children just months before in a sudden sandstorm that swallowed their camp whole. He knew what it meant to be stranded, to be broken, to have the world turn silent when you needed it most. So instead of fear, he felt something else, recognition. Slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a goatskin flask. He walked forward, ignoring the strange hum coming from their ship, and held it out. Water. Just water. No words, no demands. One of the aliens, a woman with silver streaks in her hair, stepped forward. She hesitated, then took the flask. She didn't drink. She offered it to a child clinging to her leg. The child sipped, then smiled, a small, tired smile that looked strangely human. That moment changed everything. The man stayed. He brought more water the next day, then blankets, then dried fruit. He didn't understand their language, and they didn't understand his, but they learned to communicate through gestures, expressions, and shared silence. He showed them which plants were safe to eat. They showed him how to purify brackish water using a small device no bigger than his palm. Word began to spread, not through phones or satellites, but through the quiet network of desert travelers, traders, and elders. A strange ship, gentle strangers, a shepherd helping them survive. Eventually, a scientist from a nearby university heard the rumors. She was studying atmospheric anomalies and had picked up strange energy readings from the desert. Skeptical but curious, she followed the trail and found them. She could have called the government. She could have leaked photos to the press. Instead, she sat with them around a small fire one night and listened. Through broken translation and hand-drawn symbols, they told her their story. Betrayal, exile, a long journey through darkness, and finally, this fragile moment of peace. She made a choice. She wouldn't expose them, not yet. The world wasn't ready. Fear would win. Militaries would come. Labs would open. And these gentle survivors, already broken once, would be broken again. So she joined the shepherd. Quietly, carefully, they began building a new kind of sanctuary. Not with walls or weapons, but with trust. They moved the group deeper into the mountains, into an old, forgotten Cold War bunker that had been abandoned for decades. It was damp and dark, but safe. Hidden. There, under layers of rock and secrecy, the Varelians took their first real breath since leaving home. Not because they were safe from the galaxy, but because for the first time in a long time, they weren't alone, and it all started with one man, a goatskin flask, and the simple human act of offering water to a stranger in the desert. Life underground wasn't easy, but it was safer than being out in the open. After the crash in the Taklamakan desert, the group of alien survivors was moved quietly, one by one, into an old underground facility buried deep beneath the Tian Shan Mountains. It had been built decades earlier during a time of global tension, meant to shelter people in case of war. Now it served a different purpose. Sanctuary for those the galaxy had thrown away. At first, everything felt strange to them. The air was stale, the lights too bright or too dim, and the silence, so different from the hum of their ship, was almost louder than noise. But they were grateful. Grateful for walls that hid them. Grateful for the few humans who risked everything just to keep them safe. The shepherd who first found them didn't leave. He stayed nearby, visiting often, bringing fresh bread, dried fruits, and sometimes just sitting in silence with the elders. He didn't speak their language, and they didn't speak his, but they shared something deeper, understanding. He'd lost everything to the desert once. They'd lost everything to the stars. That kind of pain doesn't need words. The scientist, the one from the university, became their bridge to the human world. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She wore simple clothes, carried a worn-out notebook, and spoke softly. But she was smart, careful, and fiercely protective. She knew that if word got out, governments would come with guns and questions, not kindness. So she worked in secret, using her university access to quietly gather medicine, vitamins, and equipment they needed to survive Earth's harsher conditions. Because Earth, for all its beauty, was hard on them. Their bodies weren't built for this planet. The gravity pulled heavier on their bones. The air, thick with pollen and dust, made them cough for weeks. Even the sunlight, so bright and constant, gave them headaches. One child developed a fever that wouldn't break. They didn't have their old medicines anymore, but the scientist remembered an old herbal remedy used by local healers. She mixed it with clean water and stayed up all night, watching over the child until the fever finally broke at dawn. That moment changed something between them. It wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about caring. Slowly, trust grew. Not just between the aliens and the humans helping them, but within the group itself. The younger ones, especially those born on Earth or who'd been very young during the journey, started to adapt faster. They mimicked human gestures. They laughed at silly things, like the way goats bleated or how wind whistled through cracks in the rock. Some even began picking up words: water, thank you, cold, safe. The elders watched this with mixed feelings. On one hand, they were relieved their children were healing, learning, surviving. On the other, they feared their own culture, their songs, their stories, their way of seeing the universe would fade away in this strange, echoing bunker. To keep their heritage alive, they started nightly gatherings. Under dim lights, they'd sit in a circle and tell stories, not just about their lost world, but about the stars they used to navigate by, the festivals they celebrated when twin moons aligned, the lullabies their grandparents sang. The scientist would sit quietly in the corner recording the sounds, not for study, but so these voices wouldn't disappear. Meanwhile, on the surface, life went on as usual. Tourists hiked the mountains. Trucks rumbled down distant roads. Satellites passed overhead, blind to what lay hidden below. The world had no idea that just a few hundred meters underground, a whole other civilization was trying to rebuild, but secrets are hard to keep forever. One day, a local trader noticed the shepherd buying more supplies than usual. Extra blankets, large water containers, even children's shoes in odd sizes. He asked questions. The shepherd just smiled and said he was helping distant relatives. It was enough to satisfy most people, but not everyone. Rumors began to spread, quietly at first. Strange lights in the mountains. Unusual footprints near dry riverbeds. A child claimed to have seen tall people with big eyes near a cave. Most adults laughed it off as imagination, but a few listened closely. The scientist knew they were running out of time. She started teaching the younger aliens how to blend in. Simple things. How to walk like humans. Less graceful, more grounded. How to wear scarves to cover their unusual skin tone. How to lower their voices. They practiced in front of mirrors, learning to mimic human expressions. Smiles that reach the eyes, nods of understanding. Even the way people tilt their heads when listening. It wasn't about pretending to be something they weren't. It was about survival. Then came the first real test. A small earthquake shook the region. Rocks tumbled down the mountainside. A village nearby lost power and water. Without thinking, a few of the younger aliens, now teenagers, followed the scientists to help. They carried supplies, cleared debris, and used a small device from their ship to purify muddy water in minutes. No one noticed them at first. They wore long coats and kept their faces partly covered. But one old woman, while drinking clean water from a cup they'd handed her, looked up and held their gaze a little too long. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly as if she understood more than she let on. That night, back in the bunker, there was tension. Had they been seen? Would someone talk? But days passed. Nothing happened. No soldiers came. No news helicopters circled the sky. Life returned to normal. Still, the experience changed them. They realized they didn't just want to hide, they wanted to help. Quietly, carefully, they began sharing small pieces of their knowledge. Their water purifier was copied in a simpler form and given to nearby villages. Their understanding of desert plants helped locals grow food in drier soil. They never took credit. They just made things a little better, a little easier. And the humans who knew the truth, they protected that secret like it was their own child. Years went by like this, hidden but not forgotten. The bunker became more than a shelter. It became a home. Gardens grew in recycled containers. Murals appeared on the walls, some showing alien constellations, others Earth sunsets. Children played games that mixed both worlds, hide and seek with rules from two planets. The shepherd grew older. His steps slowed, but he still came every week with a warm loaf of bread and a quiet smile. And every time he entered, the whole group would stand, a sign of deep respect in their culture. He never knew that. He just thought they were being polite. What no one expected was how much the humans were changing too. The scientist, once focused only on data and discovery, now spoke of dignity and belonging. The local villagers, who once feared anything unusual, now left extra food at certain trail markers, just in case the quiet helpers passed by. No one called it coexistence. They didn't need a fancy word for it. They just lived it. And in that hidden place beneath mountains and silence, something rare happened. Two lost groups, one from the stars, one from the soil, found each other not as strangers but as neighbors, not as alien and human, but as people trying to do the right thing in a world that often forgets how. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and sometimes that's enough. Time passed, and the hidden life beneath the mountain settled into a quiet rhythm, like the steady beat of a heart no one could hear but everyone depended on. The group had grown. New babies were born in that underground shelter, their first cries echoing off cold stone walls that had once been built for war. Not wonder. These children knew nothing of starships or galactic exile. To them, Earth was home. The desert wind, the smell of baking bread from the surface, the sound of goats bleating in the distance, these were their lullabies. But not everyone felt the same peace. The elders carried a heavier weight. Every morning they'd gather near the old communication panel, the one that hadn't worked in years, and stare at the static screen as if hoping, just once, to see a familiar signal from the stars. They missed their language, their songs, the way their home sun used to cast long purple shadows at dusk. Here everything was different, the light too yellow, the air too thick, the nights too silent without the hum of their old city. They tried to teach the young ones their ways, how to weave memory threads, how to read the sky for stories, how to honor silence as a form of speech. But the children, curious and bright-eyed, were drawn to Earth. They mimicked the way local kids laughed, copied the way traders haggled in the market, and even started dreaming in the local dialect. One little girl once asked, "Why do we whisper our old songs? Can't we sing them loud like the birds?" Her question broke something open. The scientist, who had become more like family than a helper, noticed the growing divide. She saw the elders' sadness and the children's confusion, so she did something simple but powerful. She asked the villagers if they'd be willing to share their own traditions, songs, dances, stories, in return for the aliens. Not as a performance, not as a show, but as an exchange between neighbors. At first, people were shy. But then an old woman brought a hand drum and sang a song about rain after drought. A young boy played a flute tune his grandfather taught him. In return, one of the alien elders, with trembling hands, showed them how to make a light glow from crushed desert stones, a harmless, beautiful trick that lit up the room like fireflies. That night, something shifted. It wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about belonging on their own terms. Still, life underground came with daily struggles. Their bodies never fully adjusted to Earth's gravity. Many walked with a slight limp or needed support after long hours standing. Earth's microbes made them sick more often than humans. Once, a flu swept through the bunker, and for weeks the place felt like a hospital. The scientist worked day and night, mixing local herbs with what little medical knowledge she could adapt from their old tech. She barely slept, but she never complained. She just kept going because giving up wasn't an option. What kept them going wasn't just survival, it was purpose. They began using their knowledge in small, quiet ways that helped the region thrive. Their understanding of water cycles helped dig better wells. Their plant knowledge helped grow crops in places that used to be too dry. They never took credit. Sometimes a farmer would find a strange but useful seed left near his field. A shepherd would discover a broken fence already fixed at dawn. No one ever saw who did it. But everyone knew, and the villagers, they started leaving things too. Extra blankets in winter, jars of honey in summer, handmade toys for the children. No names, no notes, just kindness passed hand to hand like a secret language. But the world outside didn't stay quiet forever. Rumors grew louder. Satellite images showed unusual heat patterns in the mountains. A drone, lost during a sandstorm, captured a blurry image of a tall figure near a cave entrance. At first it was dismissed as a glitch. But then a journalist, curious, persistent, started asking questions. Why did certain villages have cleaner water than others? Why were crops thriving in areas that used to be barren? The scientist knew they were running out of time. She gathered the group one evening, not in fear but in honesty. "The world is starting to notice," she said gently. "We can't stay hidden much longer. We need to decide together what comes next." Silence filled the room. Some wanted to move deeper, find another hiding place. Others, especially the young ones, said, "Why hide? We haven't done anything wrong." The elders looked at each other, eyes full of worry and weariness. They'd been hunted once. They didn't want to run again. Then a teenage boy, one born in the bunker, spoke up. "We've helped people here. They've helped us. Maybe it's time they knew the truth. Not as invaders, not as experiments, but as people who just wanted a place to rest. His words hung in the air like smoke. That night no one slept much. But something had changed. The fear was still there, yes, but so was hope. A quiet, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, Earth could be more than a hiding place. Maybe it could be a home they didn't have to apologize for. In the weeks that followed, they prepared not for escape, but for honesty. They practiced speaking clearly. They wrote down their story in simple words. They even recorded short messages in local languages, explaining who they were and why they came. They didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time they weren't waiting to be discovered. They were getting ready to be seen, and that made all the difference. The truth didn't leak out with sirens or soldiers. It slipped through the cracks quietly, accidentally, like a single drop of water finding its way through stone. One of the scientists helping the group had kept detailed logs, not for fame, not for profit, but as a record, just in case history ever needed to know what really happened. He stored them on an old encrypted drive, tucked away in a drawer no one ever opened. But during a routine lab cleanup, a new assistant, eager to prove himself, mistook it for scrap and plugged it into a university server to check its contents. The encryption held, but the metadata didn't. Within hours, an automated security scan flagged the files as anomalous. Before anyone could stop it, a copy was sent to a data archive, and from there, it found its way into the hands of a journalist who'd been chasing desert rumors for years. At first, no one believed the story. Aliens living in a mountain bunker? Come on. But then came the photos, grainy, old, but real. A tall figure in a long coat helping rebuild a well. A child with unusually large eyes watching a village festival from the edge of the crowd. And then, the clincher. Thermal satellite images showing consistent heat signatures deep in a supposedly empty zone of the Tian Shan Range. The news exploded. Overnight, the quiet desert region became the center of the world's attention. News vans rolled in. Drones buzzed like angry bees over the mountains. Governments issued statements, some demanding answers, others calling for immediate containment. Military units were put on standby. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a hoax. Religious groups debated whether they were angels or demons. And ordinary people? They just stared at their screens, hearts pounding, wondering, are we really not alone? Fear spread faster than facts, but before any army could move, before any politician could give an order, something unexpected happened. A video appeared online, uploaded from an untraceable source but clearly filmed inside the bunker. It showed a young person, human-looking at first glance but with eyes too large, skin too smooth, standing in front of a simple backdrop. They spoke slowly in clear, careful English, then Mandarin, then Arabic, then Spanish, not with grand speeches or threats but with quiet honesty. We are not here to take, they said, voice steady but soft. We are here because we had nowhere else to go. Our home was destroyed. Our people were erased. We did not come to conquer. We came to survive. Then they showed footage, real, unedited moments. An elder teaching a local child how to weave a basket using desert grass. A group purifying water for a drought-stricken village. A quiet funeral where both humans and aliens stood together in silence after a shepherd passed away. We have lived among you in secret, the speaker continued, not because we wanted to hide, but because we were afraid you would not understand. But we have seen your kindness. We have shared your bread. We have mourned and celebrated with you. And now we ask only this, see us as we are. Not monsters, not miracles. Just people who lost everything and found a little hope here. The video spread like wildfire. People didn't just watch it. They shared it with their parents, their friends, their children. In living rooms, classrooms, and cafes, strangers found themselves crying over a message from someone they'd never met. Because it wasn't about aliens. It was about being unwanted. About running out of places to belong. About one act of kindness changing everything. Public opinion shifted. Fast. Protests erupted, not against the newcomers, but for them. Let them stay. Red handmade signs in cities across the globe. Farmers in the region formed a human chain around the mountain access roads saying, they helped us when no one else did. Even former skeptics began speaking up. If they've lived here for years without hurting anyone, maybe they deserve a chance. Governments hesitated. Some still wanted control, study, secrecy. But the people had already decided. Then came the earthquake, not a big one, but enough to crack walls and cut power in nearby towns. Within hours, the same group that had been labeled unknown entities was back in action. They didn't wait for permission. They walked out of the mountains openly, calmly, and started helping, using tools no one understood, but that worked better than anything the rescue teams had. They cleared rubble, found trapped survivors, and set up clean water stations in under an hour. This time there were no scarves hiding their faces. No excuses, just hands reaching out to help, and the world watched. Not with fear, but with awe. A young girl pulled from the ruins of her home, hugged one of them tightly and refused to let go. A firefighter, exhausted and covered in dust, accepted a cup of clean water from a being with silver-tinged skin and simply said, "Thank you." No panic. No weapons drawn, just humans and others, working side by side like it was the most natural thing in the world. That moment changed everything. The footage went viral, not as sci-fi, but as proof that compassion doesn't need a species label. Leaders who had demanded containment now called for dialogue. Scientists who wanted to dissect now asked how they could collaborate. And ordinary people? They started sending letters, drawings, even seeds from their gardens, addressed simply to the mountain friends. The group didn't celebrate. They were too tired, too aware of how fragile this moment was. But for the first time since their ship crashed, they stood in daylight without fear. Not because the danger was gone, but because they finally had something worth protecting. Trust. And trust, once given, is harder to break than any wall. Peace didn't come with a grand treaty or a flashy ceremony. It grew slowly like desert grass after the first rain, quiet, steady, and full of life. After the world saw them not as invaders but as neighbors, everything changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but in the way real change always happens. One person at a time, one act of trust after another. Within a year, the United Nations passed a special resolution, unprecedented, debated for weeks, but finally agreed upon by nearly every nation. It didn't call them aliens or extraterrestrials. It called them interstellar displaced persons, and it granted them the right to stay, to live, and to be protected. A small piece of land in the Taklamakan Desert, dry, remote, but rich in silence and stars, was set aside just for them. Not a prison, not a lab, a home. Officially, it was an autonomous cultural enclave, but everyone knew what it really was. Sanctuary. They could come and go as they pleased. They could keep their customs, teach their language, and raise their children in the open air, under Earth's single sun. And they did. The old underground bunker was never abandoned. It became a museum, of sorts, a place where elders told stories to wide-eyed children, where humans and newcomers sat together over shared meals, and where the first handshake between a desert shepherd and a lost traveler was remembered like a sacred moment. But now, life happened above ground too. Homes were built, not with strange metals or glowing walls, but with sun-baked clay, stone, and wood, blending into the landscape like they'd always belonged. Solar panels designed with help from local engineers, powered lights and water pumps. Gardens bloomed where nothing had grown before, thanks to a mix of earth seeds and alien knowledge of soil balance. Children, some born on distant stars, others born right here in the desert, ran barefoot through the sand, laughing in a mix of languages, playing games that no one had ever seen before. The world watched, curious but respectful. Scientists came, not with needles or cages, but with notebooks and questions. How do you purify water so fast? Can you teach us to grow food in dry places? And the group shared what they could, not as secrets, but as gifts. In return, humans taught them how to bake bread that rose just right, how to read poetry under the stars, how to dance at weddings until their feet ached. There were still challenges, of course. Not everyone accepted them. Some voices online still called them dangerous or fake. A few governments kept watch from a distance just in case, but those voices grew quieter with time, drowned out by the simple truth of daily life. These people weren't taking anything. They were giving. One of their biggest contributions came during a global drought. Crops were failing, rivers were drying up. Panic spread. But in the desert enclave, Water still flowed, clean, cool, and abundant. They opened their systems to the world, not for money, but because they remembered what it felt like to be thirsty and alone. Their filtration method, simple, low cost, and powered by nothing but sunlight, was shared freely. Within 2 years, villages across Africa, India, and South America were using it. No patents, no fees, just clean water for anyone who needed it. That act alone changed how millions saw them, not as outsiders but as part of the human family. Different, yes, but caring in the same way. The shepherd who first offered water never lived to see the full bloom of this new world. He passed away, peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by people who loved him, both human and not. At his funeral, the whole enclave came. They didn't speak much. They just stood in silence, hands on each other's shoulders, watching the sun set over the dunes. Later, they planted a tree where he used to rest with his goats, a rare thing in that dry land. But it grew. Strong, green, alive. Every year since, on the day he was found, both communities gather for a quiet ceremony. Elders from the desert and elders from the stars sit together, sharing tea and memories. Children place small stones at the base of the tree, one for every act of kindness they've witnessed that year. No speeches, no cameras, just gratitude, passed down like a song. The younger generation now moves easily between worlds. Some study in universities, learning engineering or medicine. Others stay in the enclave, teaching Earth children how to read the night sky, not just for navigation but for stories. A few have even fallen in love with humans, building families that blend both lineages. Their children have eyes that hold galaxies and smiles that feel like home. They still look up at the stars sometimes, not with longing but with peace. The galaxy that cast them out is far away now, and they've made their peace with that. They don't need forgiveness from those who forgot them. They've found something better, belonging. And Earth, once just a desperate stop on a broken journey, became more than a refuge. It became a promise that no one is too different to be welcomed, too strange to be understood, or too lost to be found. Today, if you travel to that quiet corner of the desert, you won't see flying ships or glowing towers. You'll see smoke rising from clay chimneys, children chasing goats, and old men playing board games under the shade of a single green tree. You might hear a song in a language no dictionary knows, mixed with the sound of a local flute. And if you're lucky, someone might offer you water, not because you're important, but because that's just what people do here. In the end, they didn't save Earth. And Earth didn't save them. They saved each other, by choosing kindness when fear would have been easier, by offering a hand instead of a weapon, and by remembering that home isn't a place on a map. It's where you're allowed to be yourself and still be loved. And that's a story worth telling, not as science fiction, but as a quiet truth hidden in the heart of our world.